Come with me to a magical place where being labeled the pork queen is a compliment, where being nice is just a way of life, and where all leaders of the free world must pass through. Welcome to Iowa. Whether you're a current Iowan, an Iowa expat, or an Iowan at heart, this show is for you. This is the Iowa Podcast. Real Iowans, real talk, no drama. From the Brady Dental Care Studio, I am Justin Brady, and one of the very popular films you may have seen, or at least I know you've heard about it, is Sound of Freedom. I think that's the name. It has Jim Caviezel. It's about human trafficking, and it's one of those issues that you look at, you think that's such a bad thing, but sometimes we really don't make the connection that's actually happening right here in Iowa. And so I have brought the Secretary of State on the Iowa Podcast, Paul Pate. Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure to have an opportunity to share with folks how serious human trafficking is here in Iowa as well as across the country and the world, for that matter.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't really know that the Secretary of State office is involved. I know when I think of the Secretary of State office, I think of that place I go to register my business, and you guys send me the biennial report every other year, and I get annoyed that I haven't filled it out yet. So that's all I know, but there's a lot more to what you do, which is what we're talking about today. For anyone listening, like I've told you before, we bring you a lot of really good information every week here on the Iowa Podcast. If you like what you hear, subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and yes, even our nemesis, iHeartRadio. We actually love everybody over there, so it's all in good fun. Like I said, Secretary Pate, thank you so much for coming in here. The first big question I have is kind of everybody, you guys mentioned like see something, say something, right? You mention that all the time. We kind of know that as Iowans, that if we see something, we should say something, but I think most people have a fear of getting it wrong. Right? They don't want to call out something that is completely innocent. They don't want to be labeled that person. They don't want to be called a label like, oh, you're just against this certain people group. That's why you saw. So what are we not seeing? Like, what are the things we should be looking for?
Well, I'd like folks to take this and treat it more like a neighborhood watch concept. You look around, and if something looks out of place, you just put in perspective. If you saw activity at your neighbor's house, a van backed up and they're hauling out the big screen TV, and their neighbors are gone to Florida, you probably would call the police. I hope they would. Human trafficking and labor trafficking is similar to that. We're not asking you to be the expert. We're not asking you to take any personal action in the sense of confronting anybody. We're asking you to alert law enforcement if it's an immediate situation, and there's some hotline numbers if it's something you're just wanting someone to look into. We want you to take that step. That's really what we're talking about here, because trafficking is one of those crimes that has really kind of fallen between the cracks over the years. Many times it's been confused when you start looking at the statistics with the symptoms that come out of it. Prostitution, drug trafficking, a lot of other crimes that get tied into it, because these people who are bringing these folks into the trafficking game are usually putting them in bad places. And so when law enforcement does come into play, there's where they're coming into play. They didn't get there because of the trafficking.
Oh, it's a secondary thing.
Well, certainly.
Oh, so people see other things, and then it the police show up, and it turns out that there's a whole lot more to it than meets the eye.
Right.
Is that part of the problem with identifying it? Like, it masks itself as other things, and people are just like, whatever, that's a homeless person, or that's a drug addict. I'm not going to mess with that. Is that one of the problems?
Well, it's been hard to put the seriousness behind it, because the statistics, the FBI statistics, and those were reflecting the crimes I mentioned, prostitution, drugs, and all that, not necessarily trafficking. And many of these people who are being arrested for prostitution are actually ones who were trafficked. So they're a victim, and also now they're being accused of a crime.
Unreal.
So it's a very challenging situation by all means. So it's not an easy one to always get your arms around and be able to resolve and do. It's one of those things that we want to try and stop it before it gets to that level.
Yeah.
And it can be really challenging. And people, let me tell you, this isn't like Hollywood. Hollywood images, some van pulls up, some guys with masks on jump out, grab a woman and kidnap her and sell her into the sex trade.
Yeah.
Now, that might happen in places, don't get me wrong, but that isn't normally how it happens. These are people who prey on individuals through social media or through other avenues and get you when you're vulnerable, bring you in, giving you an assurance of, hey, I'm your friend, I'm your best friend, and lead them into a situation that they don't need to be in and frankly don't want to be there, and get them either addicted to drugs or get them into a lifestyle that is bad. And human trafficking has no age barriers. We've seen people who've been trafficked as young as 6 months old, sadly, by their own family, to people who are 90 years old. And so it's unfortunately one of those crimes that doesn't have any barriers on age.
Yeah.
So it's one of those that you really do need to just let the law enforcement folks can be the ones who will sort it out. We need you to be our source of our eyes and ears out there.
So you've gone into a couple really good things that I want to dig into a little deeper. The first one, though, is like how you mentioned social media.
Right.
I think you just busted wide open a misconception there. You mentioned like age range, which is very disturbing. We're going to go into that as well. But I want to go back to how is it so effectively hidden? Because, it's underreported, as you guys often say, it's underreported. How is it being hidden so well?
Sure. Well, let me take the one that probably has the most attention because everyone has got an issue with anyone taking advantage of our young children. Mm-hmm. Our young people today are a whole different game. There's a lot of social pressures put on them. We see serious, significant depression issues with our young kids, high suicide rates with our young children, and we're dealing with the advent of the internet and all the things that go along with that. Parents don't have the same kind of control, and they don't necessarily know everything that's going on in their kid's life. And that's why I say the symptoms can be somewhat confusing. What am I looking at? If my kid is acting different, and my kid acting different just because they're a teenager? Is it because they have some school issues? Someone's bullying them? Is it because that they just have serious depression issues? What does a parent do and how do they handle it? This day and age, these kids are being recruited into trafficking while they're still living at home.
That's crazy.
And parents don't even know it. Somebody posing as their supposed boyfriend is trafficking them. And that could be trafficking them for drugs or trafficking them just for popularity's sake. And these people aren't going to mom and dad and telling them about it, and they hide it behind all kinds of apps on their phone. We call them hidden apps. Parent picks up a phone, doesn't even know it's on there. It's hidden behind a bogus calendar. It's really challenging these days as a parent.
Wow. So, okay, you within that, you mentioned something that's really critical is I think everyone has the image in their head that the human trafficking, right? The van, the black bag, people pull up, they squeal out. It almost looks like an operation to kidnap a dignitary, right? Like you said, maybe that happens a few times. It's not exactly happening all the time. But you also mentioned, I think a lot of people have in their image, in their head, a lot of Iowans, like there is this dark warehouse and you have to knock a special way to get in, or there's this maybe place out in rural Iowa in the middle of nowhere. It's isolated, and everyone's being held against their will in a prison-like scenario. And sure, and I would like to know if that happens. But you mentioned that there are trafficking victims in their own parents' houses. How is this possible?
Well, you've got both extremes. The ones where the parent may not know about it, but the kid is doing it because some outsider has recruited them into a bad place. Gosh. And then you, of course, have the one where there's an aunt, an uncle, or someone who's close to the family who is doing this as well. And they'll tell the kid, if you say something, I'm going to harm another kid, or they will prey on them and say, your mom and dad don't understand you. I'm going to be your favorite uncle and give you things and just win their confidence enough to get them in a bad place. And then it's hard to go back from that bad place. And I'm going to tell you right up front, I am by far not the expert in human trafficking. My role here is to be an advocate, to be someone who raises awareness and to encourage people to become more in tune with what's going on. I have been promoting people to learn something and to do something, but I leave it to these advocates, these specialists who are in the trenches battling this every day in law enforcement to really bring it home and help us get to where we want to go.
Yeah, and like I said, the Iowa Department of Public Safety was like, you need to talk to the Secretary of State office, get Paul Pate on there because they're doing a lot of work. So they had nothing but positive things to say about what you're doing. It is interesting, and you did indicate this a little bit, but I want to be very, very clear because I know parents listening to this are like, oh my word, my son, my daughter has been acting differently lately. I wonder if this is going on. And so are there specific, and you mentioned that they can hide apps, so the parent may not even know what to look for. Is there like a step 1, 2, 3? Do these things right now before it's too late? Is there something they can do right now?
Well, I would tell you this. As a parent myself, I would strongly encourage parents to continue to do what they do best, and that is be involved in their kids' lives, to be listening to them, to note when they have big shifts and changes in their personality. If they're hanging with a new crowd, know who they're hanging with. I mean, these are all common sense things. I'm not sounding off on something new and special, but I think it's so important in this day and age. And when they do see these changes in their behavior, I think they need to be monitoring to figure out, is it any of the bad situations? As I mentioned, is it depression? Could they be slipping into a drug situation? There are a lot of telltale signs, and most of these are more mental health issues because they do play a lot into what puts these people in the position to be recruited by bad people. Those are all parts of it. And so whether you're really looking out just for trafficking or you're just looking out for the welfare of the child, I think they're parallel. They're the same thing in the end. There are things like if the kid has a second cell phone, that's pretty suspicious. Why are you having a second cell phone? Tattoos. Sadly, these human trafficking pimps are branding their kids with these tats, and or you see them with extra cash that they don't normally have. What's that about? And again, some of these signs could be seen as a drug related too. But I tell you that so often drugs do go hand in hand with what we're talking about when it comes to trafficking. So those are all parallel to it. And there's some really good groups out there. If you go to our website, ibat.iowa.gov, we connect you up with a lot of good advocate groups who have some of the tell signs and also resources if you need help, if you want to get your child with a counselor or if you need to know more about it or you want to get more involved. I encourage that. We started that program, Iowa Businesses Against Trafficking, almost 2 years ago now. And we have over 700 businesses across the state who are signed up to share with their employees, their customers, what we're talking about for trafficking. So they do learn more about it, and they're doing something about it by educating the public. And the message is, be our neighborhood watch. Watch out for it, and let's help people.
What can businesses do then? You mentioned IBAT, which is, I did write it out because I'm a good researcher, Iowa Businesses Against Trafficking, right? So what are the things that businesses can do? Is this like retail locations that have more like gas stations and retail locations or anybody? Okay, walk me through that. What can they do and look for? How are you educating businesses?
Well, when we launched this, I was really impressed. The majority of the businesses who came up early were small mom and pop shops, whether it be Adel, Iowa, or Lime Springs, Iowa, or Des Moines. They were from all cross sections. They were Main Street businesses, etc. And their own feedback was, look, we want to make sure we have safe communities. We feel good about where we live. Iowa's a great place to be a part of. But until it's safe for everyone, our work isn't done. And as employers, again, they want to have a safe community for their employees and for themselves. So they did have a bond to get involved right away. And we've seen these small businesses, and we have the large ones. Hy-Vee's a part of it, Fairway. Some of the biggest companies are joining us in this outreach effort. The Casey's folks, in fact, I got to tell you, Casey's has been an astronomical booster of this. Many of these businesses have put stickers in the bathroom saying, if you need help with trafficking,
I've seen
call
those.
These numbers.
Yeah.
And we promote that aggressively. And they've had instances where an individual was being trafficked, saw the sticker, went to the Casey staffer and said, I'm trafficked, help me. Whoa. They called police. Police came, arrested the bad guy, and got that person out of a bad scenario.
Wow.
That's one story.
That's
one of
crazy.
many. And if we save one, that's one more than we were before. And it's alarming to see the statistics out there that we do have. I was looking at the last numbers we had from 2022, and we had 661 trafficking victims that were served alone.
This is 2022?
2022. These
600, how many?
661 victims who were served through our victim assistance efforts, and 224 child sex allegations were out there. Now, allegations and prosecutions are a different game, folks.
Yep.
But this is statistics we are very alarming.
Yeah.
And boys, girls, both. This isn't one gender over the other. And age, again, is not a discriminating factor here, because it goes all the way up to, as I said, 90 years old. But our children are the ones we've probably seen here the most, because we have a soft spot for them. And we want to be a part of making sure we can stop it where we can.
So there are what I'm hearing is, I'm sure there's a bell curve like anything, but there is no barrier to gender, race, ethnicity, region.
No.
It's pretty much, if you have a heartbeat, you could be a target or a victim of this.
Oh, certainly. And what we're talking about here is
Wow.
when a sex act is induced by force or fraud or cohesion, in which that person is asked to do some kind of act like this, particularly when they're under 18, it's very concerning. And they do this through various forms of manipulation, as I've pointed out already. Getting your confidence, preying on you there, threatening you after they get you in there, photographs to blackmail you to say, if you want to go back, well, we're going to release these pictures of you. You want your parents and all your neighbors to know you did these things.
Yeah.
So it's a really ugly situation. And so it's one of those we really have to work to try and get ahead of the curve and keep these people from getting in that life to begin with. The movie you talked about when we opened up here talks about an international situation where they were taking children from a different country and stealing these children and selling them into the sex trade game.
Wow.
That's very alarming. And the sad part is the United States is ranked as one of the worst countries when it comes to trafficking right now in the world.
What?
Yeah, in the world.
How can that be?
Sadly, it's because we have money, and we have when there's money, it just feeds the whole trafficking scenario. Some of the large sporting venues we see in our country, and even in our state, is an attraction for prostitution, and trafficking comes along with that. I'm sorry.
I'm
just going to kick in.
Yeah.
People think they're trafficking. Oh, that's only on like Interstate 35.
Yeah,
and
that's
80.
the big question.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, we have all this human trafficking here just because it's 80-35, which puts us in literal crosshairs.
Certainly.
But that's
It's not true at all. Because we have this third road, and that's the internet, social media, these players can be anywhere. They can be in rural county, anywhere in Iowa, and advertise, hey, I've got a 10-year-old here, boy, if you want to come see him. And these people will come from 2 states over or more to, unfortunately, prey on these kids. And it's very hard for law enforcement to bust those situations because they're hiding behind the internet. And this is back to neighborhood watch. If you're living in a community and you know your neighborhood, and all of a sudden you see all these strange out-of-state cars pulling in at weird days and hours, something's probably not right over there. Now, whether they're having a meth lab or whether they're doing human trafficking or some other bad thing, there's nothing wrong with being a good neighbor and just telling law enforcement, hey, there's a lot of unusual activity over here. Let them do their investigation. That's the kind of thing you can do to help.
People people don't understand that law enforcement, like they see the movies, they see all that stuff, like law enforcement has the satellite imagery. They can zoom into your house and read the barcode off your Timex watch that you're wearing, even with, like, that's not true. And the same is true in, like, when I used to be a journalist, like people would say, why haven't you covered this story? And I'd be, it's a great story. Why didn't you cover it? And I'm like, no one let me know. Like, I can't cover something I'm not aware of.
Right.
They're like, aren't you the news? Don't you? I'm like, we don't have magical tools that tell us when news is happening. And the same is true in law enforcement. There are things that happen all the time. They have no knowledge of them. And sometimes, like you mentioned earlier, breaking up an entire ring like that could be a simple phone call from an Iowan saying, hey, this isn't right. Something's happening. I've not seen this before. I just wanted to put it on your radar. I'm assuming the police don't come and say, hey, we're kicking. They knock on the door and say your
Right.
neighbor called and said you were up to shady activity. I'm assuming that doesn't happen. I hope. Yeah.
No,
Okay.
they
So
have
they
much
keep
better
it.
tact.
They keep it quiet.
Well,
Yeah.
they do. And I got to tell you, some of our best folks in this game have been our motor truckers. On a national level, they're very active in this game.
Interesting.
And because these human traffickers are very mobile, they're moving around all the time. And so these drivers are being trained through various programs we have that are available to them to know what to look for and to alert law enforcement to the same situation. And there's been stories done in Iowa already about situations where truckers interceded and had Iowa people who were victims of trafficking and being abused and transported across state lines. So again, there are things you can do to watch for these kind of folks who might need their help. I kind of equate it with, and can be an uncomfortable scenario, but okay, you're out shopping at one of the major stores, and you see a child who doesn't look like they're supposed to be with those people. Do you go home wondering if I should have said something to the store manager, or do I do that?
Yeah.
Trafficking's the same thing. There's nothing wrong with pointing out a concern. It's not a big stretch. Again, let authorities sort it out. They are the experts in it. And the other thing about all this is it's very hard for law enforcement to stay on top of all of it.
Yeah.
I mentioned sporting venues. When you see a major sporting venue like the Iowa State game,
Yeah.
great sporting event, we're all excited about it and we're pumped up about it. You've got, quite a few thousand people showing up for this venue. Law enforcement is focused on traffic control, maybe some drinking issues,
Sure.
dealing with those
True.
kind of safety issues. They don't exactly have their vice squad out there at the level we might want them to be to make sure we don't have people who take advantage of this for the trafficking situation. And you can do that with concert venues and you name what it is. So it's extremely hard on them. So they really do depend on the public's tuning them into what's going on so they can kind of have more resources all around.
And that is one of the things that I think a lot of Iowans hear is that events like that, and like you said, it's very hard to, I want to point out like Iowa State game, big events, the
Right,
NCAA,
right.
all this cool stuff that is really great that Iowa appreciates. Those events aren't responsible at all.
Oh,
They're not,
not at
they're
all.
not doing.
No.
But with big events like that, this is what we hear, comes human trafficking opportunities. And I always. This is always hard for me because I don't want to exactly give your playbook away to the people you're going after.
Right.
But I also want to help Iowans so that they kind of know that playbook so they can look out for things.
Sure.
So is it just like, are people, is it mostly internet driven? What does this look like? Like, why does a big event attract human trafficking opportunities for the bad guys? I don't understand that.
I again, my expertise aren't necessarily there.
Yeah, no,
but
I understand.
I'll
Yeah.
give you my armchair opinion.
Yeah.
People get stupid when they leave to go out of town, have some alcohol, and have a lot of money. And they don't feel as accountable because, my neighbors aren't looking over my shoulder. And I think sometimes that puts them in a bad place where they shouldn't be.
Sure.
That's just one issue here. But you're absolutely right. These venues, these activities are wholesome events.
Yep.
Unfortunately, these sick people prey on those
Right.
as an opportunity. And that's why, and I'm proud of the fact that many of these organizations have stepped up to try and fight it. I mentioned the stickers in the bathrooms. Just recently, Ankeny has their Summerfest. Big partner with us on against fighting trafficking. All the porta potties had the stickers in it.
Wow.
All their vendors were trained on what to look for on trafficking and given the number. Now, I'll stop with that. They did some other things that we don't need to let the bad guys know they did.
Right,
To try
yeah.
and make sure
Yeah.
that this is a safe family event. And that's to be applauded. And that's what a lot of these others are doing, like the football venues and others. They're stepping up and making sure that it's a safe environment and they're not going to put up with anybody trying to do any trafficking or bad things at their venue.
So what's interesting is for people who want to know more information and they're like, I do want to help, but, Secretary Pate's not explaining specific things I can do. I'm assuming if they go through the Iowa Business Against Trafficking Network, IBAT, that there's this program, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they can, once they're kind of vetted to a degree, they can understand a little bit better what to look for. Is that kind of what that's for?
We're a pretty good resource if you go
Yeah.
to our website because it points you in all the different directions of what you might want. But we partnered up early on with our partners because we wanted to make sure that we had the best available. And our friends from the Iowa Network Against Trafficking, they're our big resource. But I'll give a couple numbers out to your listeners. We want to encourage people to look at.
And if anyone's driving, I'll post these on our website as well. So don't start writing notes when you're driving.
Don't do that, folks. But there's a national hotline. You can report things if you're seeing something such as drug use or signs of abuse and trafficking. And that's the 888-737-7888. Or you can go to Stop Iowa, and that's spelled out, .org, and they can take that information and pass it on to law enforcement. That's one source, as I mentioned.
Now, is it stopiowa.org or stophትዮwa.org?
You're right.
Okay,
Thank you.
Just making sure.
You got better notes than I have.
This is not my first rodeo. Stop.
HT, human trafficking. I should have got that
I'll
one
make
too.
sure to put all that in the show notes. Stophትዮwa.org.
And those are good jump-off places. But this is a partnership, between working with the Iowa Department of Public Safety, the Attorney General's office, the governor. On the federal level, we work with, it's called the Blue Campaign, which is part of the Homeland Security folks. We're all in this, and IBAT is about bringing businesses to the table. And as I mentioned, when you talk about 700 plus businesses, that's hundreds of thousands of employees that are now being better prepared to be a part of stopping trafficking here in our state. And I think that's where we're at right now, and hope to see more growth in that area in the future.
So you mentioned earlier, just our last 5 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned earlier, social media and technology has really changed the game. And people are taking advantage of social media. You mentioned earlier, people are posting things in two states away. I have this young person come take a look. I don't even know what that involves. But again, without giving away the playbook, is this like a typical social media, like people posting stuff they shouldn't to TikTok and Twitter or X, whatever it is now, and YouTube, and then they're posting something and that gains attention from the wrong crowd? What do Iowans look for? What does that mean
You got
exactly?
two different things here. You have the recruiters.
It's a lot.
You have the recruiters, and then the sellers. The sellers, they know what sites to go to. I call them black sites. They go
so
to
certain websites that are doing this.
They're going to certain websites because that's where these predators are going to for looking for people they want to take advantage of. Wow. On the recruiting side, they could be someone who's pretending in a game room that they're a 12-year-old. Or a 14-year-old, gaining the confidence of a kid on that. And then later they start talking more informally, going, oh, yeah, my parents are a bummer too. Yours are too? Okay. Well, why don't we meet at the mall? And we can compare notes. And all of a sudden, this 12-year-old shows up and the guy is really 19. That's why, this is not an easy thing I'm laying out there for people. I actually, after hearing this, you may say, I can't sleep at night. I'm going to have to worry about my kid. And I can tell you, it puts you as a parent to where you just kind of want to lock them up and protect them all the time. Yeah. But there are things you do, and the biggest advice is we just do our very best as a parent to know who our kids' friends are and know where they're going. And sometimes they're going to tell us, oh, give me a break. I'm just going out with my buddies to the mall. Well, I trust you. I don't always know your buddies.
Don't trust your friends.
Yeah, I need to know more. Bring your friends over to the house so I get to know them.
So it can be as simple as a child posting something on social media, and some creep comments on it, and slowly over the course of months builds that relationship to the point where it lures them out of the house to a location. And it's a very long-term thing. It's not an overnight kind of thing.
They're grooming them.
Sure. And
they do that with the kids. And I tell you, this game is full spectrum because they'll do the same thing with women who are incarcerated. They will a pen pal kind of concept. They will pen pal these people, building a friendship and relationship so that when they get out on parole or get out, now I'm your best friend.
Unreal.
And I'm going to bring you right into the fold on trafficking you and prostituting you. These folks, when there's money involved, they just seem to just come attracting to it, and it's just a tough one for law enforcement all the time. And the more we can just as a community kind of stay in touch with what's going on around us, the better.
You mentioned, last thing, you mentioned something that probably parents have been screaming at me through their Alexa or through whatever the device they're listening to. Ask him about the hidden apps.
Yeah.
Because I think this is one area that may surprise parents. They're like, hey, Secretary Pate, I have access to my kids' apps.
Right.
I tell them to unlock their phone every month, and I take a look at what apps they have, and I look at the messages. But now you're telling them that there are hidden apps. There are things they cannot see. Can you walk them through that? How do they find that? Do they have to send this to a black site where you guys go through with what is a best practice here to find out this hidden communication, these hidden apps?
Well, I hope these parents you're listening are much more sophisticated than I am, because I'm kind of techie challenged. You need to find somebody in your life who has a little more up on their tech game, so they can help you walk through it. Because you can go online and they'll have various methods you can check on what's out there for in respect to apps behind apps. The most common one I'm aware of is things that are hidden behind what might look like a calendar on their cell phone, and you go to that calendar and you'll see, Billy's got a violin lesson at 3. It's written down there, but there's a way that they're hiding something behind it, but again, you can do some research, and I'd say that if you look at our website, we'll tie you into our partners who have advocates. There's groups like Chains Interrupted out of Cedar Rapids who service a lot of Iowa. They have people who go out and speak on things like the apps and other issues that might be very beneficial. I'll give you a quick story, and that was they did some training for the Eastern Iowa Airport, that's Cedar Rapids Airport, and for the law enforcement folks out there. Shortly after they did that, the law enforcement people interceded on a young lady who was being trafficked to Chicago. She was at the airport, and the bad guys were flying her out of Iowa.
Gosh.
And they said, hey, thank you, because what you showed us on how to kind of look for signs, we asked the right questions.
Yeah.
And found out what this was going on, and were able to intercede. These advocates are pretty good about helping the community learn more firsthand, and I'd encourage that.
Yeah. You always wonder when you go to the airports and you see these signs behind security, that should tell you something, that some of these traffickers are not fazed by TSA and all the security. They are still taking people through airports. That is crazy. And that right there should tell every Iowan, hey, you can either sit on the sidelines and do nothing and this problem will get worse, or you can get involved. Those are your two options as Iowans.
And in many cases, they want to get you as far away from home as they can, so you are really dependent on them.
So again, it's stophtiowa.org. And again, everyone, we're posting all this to iowapodcast.com. And the number is 888-737-7888. Secretary of State Paul Pate, thank you so much. By the way, I never even figured that out, but it rhymes. Secretary of State Paul Pate. Secretary of State Paul Pate, thank you so much for coming on the Iowa Podcast. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you giving me a chance to put the message out.
And to my fellow Iowans, Iowa expats, and Iowans at heart, thanks for listening and subscribing to the Iowa Podcast.